AI is here, whether we like it or not. Whether it be in the art world or communication, AI can be found just about everywhere. It's even arrived in the podcasting world. My guest today is Sam Plank, who is the founder and CEO of Dubb, an AI marketing tool for podcasters. Together, we talk about the implications of recent AI models such as Dall-e, Stable Diffusion, and Mid Journey. We talk about the importance of AI alignment, of reducing biases in AI models, as well as the implications of AI in the legal profession. Of course, there are concerns about the use of AI in our everyday life. Should we rely on it? Should we trust it? Is AI something more than just a tool? And what are our lives going to look like alongside AI? If you have even a passing interest in AI, you do not want to miss this episode. Before we get talking about AI, which is obviously what you're doing right now, I think it's only fair we get a little bit of context as to how you ended up sort of here. So think back to when you first started your BA in applied maths. Is that something you always wanted to do?
No, actually. I kind of fell into applied math by accident. I came to college really not knowing what I wanted to do. Part of me thought I wanted to study history. I've always really loved history. Part of me thought I wanted to study biology. And I was taking a prerequisite for a biology class in math, and I found it to just be like super interesting and taught with a level of curiosity that I'd never seen before in learning math, and it made me want to pursue it more.
What were the specifics that you found really, really interesting that really made you say, yeah, I'm going to make applied maths my degree?
So I think I was taking some calculus class, like I was saying, for this prerequisite in biology, and I enjoyed that. And then the other classes you took were also things like introduction to computer science and statistics and things like that. And I just started seeing that I had these other interests as well, like how can you think about political science or government or history, and being able to apply the lens of math and computer science to those fields like opened up whole new possibilities of what you could study within them. So a specific example is what I did my undergrad thesis on, which is this kind of looking at how what people tweet about on Twitter affects their intent to do some form of offline protest. And I was kind of able to do that and do this study where I scraped a bunch of Twitter data and then looked at some correlations and other things between that data and another data set I had, because I had built up these skills in stats and math and things like that. So I think the thing that was really exciting to me about it was kind of the toolkit that it gave me to study all these different other subjects in a quantitative way.
Awesome. I kind of want to know more about that thesis now. Like, what were your kind of findings in that?
So full disclosure, like, it was an undergrad thesis. So, and, looking back, I'm like, oh, I probably should have like spent some more time on this or been more rigorous about that. But the basic premise was, one of the big ways that people kind of protest to their elected representatives, at least in the US, I imagine so in the UK too, is they call up their representative on their government phone number and say, like, I'm so mad about this bill or this law or whatever. And so I basically started scraping all this data from Twitter that had the phone numbers in it of all the congressmen and senators and stuff in the United States. And then I did that for a few months so I could look at, like, okay, what are all the tweets that are people tweeting where they include one of these phone numbers? And usually if they were doing that, they were saying, like, call up your senator and say you're mad about the bill about abortion or something. And then I also started pulling in a bunch of data from Google, which showed search interest in things like how to call your senator, stuff like that, and basically tried to understand like when people start tweeting in tweeting about specific issues or tweeting in kind of higher frequencies, does that actually translate into them going and seeking out how they could, turn that kind of social media protest stuff into offline protests where they're actually calling their senators. And so I had some kind of initial findings. I don't think it was anything crazy conclusive, but the results were like, yeah, the more something was on Twitter, like the more it seemed like it might translate into offline action.
That's really interesting. And some of the most interesting findings, I think, in any kind of science, whether it's the social sciences or whether it's what's known as the hard sciences, we're thinking physics, biology, they have all started out as someone's undergrad thesis idea or someone's idea they had in second or third year of undergrad, and then they've
Yeah.
developed into something else. Would you be going back to that, or is what you're currently doing more kind of that's taken over now?
Yeah, I don't think I'll be going back to that, but some part of me thinks in like a different life it would be fun to go more down the academic road and like,
Yeah.
go seriously study something in grad school, but it's not what I'm working on right now. No.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. So I ended up getting my own degree in psychology, but Harvard seems a million miles away from Northampton. And I'm really curious, what is Harvard like? Can you give me kind of like an insight into studying there as a student?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say like everything about the architectural style and like how they set up the classes at Harvard was just copied from kind of the big universities in England, 400 years ago. So it's possible it's not as different as you think. Um, the I would say the things that generally surprised me about Harvard were, I think the two biggest things for me about Harvard were, one, like everyone you meet there, regardless of whether you get along as friends or not, is just like has some kind of super interesting side hobby or fascination, and is really committed to it. And like if you talk to them for long enough, you'll find out what it is. So like everyone you bump into is just has something like kind of wonderful to share. And then the other thing that really surprised me was like you go to class, or you go listen to a lecture or something, and the people that are talking to you are like really leading. They're leading in their field. They're famous in some capacity, but basically as a rule, they were all very approachable. Like you could go up to them after class and talk to them. They'd make office hours. I hardly ever encountered anyone who was like openly arrogant as far as professors go. And that was really like a nice surprise, just that these people who are kind of, like demigods, or like just, can be pretty friendly and like warm.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I'm finding more similarities than differences just from that description, because at Northampton as well, some of the most interesting people I've met in my life have been at Northampton. Kind of why I called this podcast Tom Meets Interesting People. Everyone you bumped into did have some kind of side thing that they were doing as well. I think we had definitely a lot more mature students, which made it really, really interesting as well. So it's kind of interesting for me to kind of see how, even though our universities are a million miles away, they're still kind of similar. Now, obviously, the whole point of this meeting today is not to reminisce about our universities, but to actually talk about AI. So I'm kind of curious. Let's start with, I think, but perhaps maybe one of those top level questions that's going to have more nuance than I realize. How does an AI work?
It's basically like a math function, and it's a math function that has, if you wrote it on paper, it's a huge math function. Um, but it's a function that takes in some input. Like for instance, it might be you know uh, a number, or it might be a string of text, like the Tom Meets Interesting People podcast, or it might be an image, like it's an image of us talking, and it runs that through this big math function, that has a bunch of weights in it that kind of alter the input in different ways, and then it outputs the output in whatever desired form you have. So like maybe if it's a number that goes in, the AI say it's a number that goes in that's like this is the score of these are a bunch of scores that someone has with their credit cards and like their buying history, and then the output is going to be like their credit score. And then if it's text, maybe the input text is the Tom's podcast, and then the output is kind of a longer paragraph that says something about what your podcast might be about. Or maybe the image that goes in is a picture of us, and then the output is um, a description of what's going on here, like two people talking on a podcast. And generally, the way that you make this function that can take the input and generate the output, you have to collect a large amount of training data, which is like um, in most cases a lot of examples of the input you want and the outputs that you want to get, and you pass it through a number of different training systems that will start to learn, like, okay, if we have this starting point, the training input, and we want this output, how do we start tuning the weights that are in the middle of this function such that they turn the input into the output that we want. And if you use enough data, like we're talking about, trillions of things in some cases, you can start to develop very complex functions, AI models in the middle that have uh, billions of weights within them. And those can start to do like super complex things, like some of the stuff we're seeing now with Chat GPT or kind of crazy models like that.
Mhm. So, kind of in short, it is AI is just a giant maths function that's been trained on different inputs. It's been given different weights to produce the desired response.
Yeah, I mean, in short, it's just AI systems are just, yeah, like you said, it's a big math function. Like you can look at AI models with your human eyes. It won't mean much, but basically it's just, thousands and thousands or millions or billions of these weights that correspond to basically how an input should be uh, modulated into an output. And there's different architectures, like some AI models work, in some way, some in another, but broadly they all fit into that same kind of definition of like
Mhm.
it's a function.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to come back also to the source and the reference material in a minute, but before I do that, I think with 2022, it definitely, to me, just as a consumer, just as a casual consumer, it seemed to be the year that AI really entered the public consciousness. So,
Yeah.
what made this year so different? What were like the big advances that happened that made 2022 almost the year of the AI?
I think a lot of people are thinking about this. My general interpretation of why things really blew up so much this year, I think there's two broad things. So one, there were a bunch of advancements in what are called text to image models. So these are models where, and by model I mean like an AI model, where you input some string of text like dog walking in the park with it wearing a tutu or something, and then the model will return for you an image that reflects like what you said. And you can say all sorts of crazy things in the input. You can say things that have never been, that don't happen in real life or have not been painted before, or like brand new novel things. And the AI models are able to actually like produce an output that's coherent and does this. And so a bunch of these models came out like over the summer, or maybe before that, I forget. But the latest version of Dall-e, this model Stable Diffusion, there's a bunch of updates to Mid Journey. These models all kind of work and do the same thing, but uh, the outputs are so eye catching, and they were broadly open for people to play around with them, that I think that helped a lot of people kind of get into AI. And then the other big thing that's been happening in the past month is the launch of Chat GPT, which is a text model where you can write some input and then it will write a bunch of output back to you. And this came out from OpenAI. It's a version of a model that they already had and they launched 2 years ago, which has been kind of famous. But uh, this really exploded that type of AI model into the public consciousness because everyone and their grandma can go on and play with Chat GPT and just kind of be wowed by the output.
Mm. Yeah, now that's kind of really interesting to just sort of, because I definitely sort of agree with what you said when you talked about the AI art generators, because we just saw them over the summer. Go on Twitter, you can go on DeviantArt, you can go on whatever website that you consume art, and you consume media, and everybody was making them. So yeah, like you said, bringing that barrier to entry down really low is almost, they almost made a consumer product.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think like I don't know the numbers for the um, text to art models, but I think for the Chat GPT, the chatbot thing, they have like over 1 million people using it, which yeah, it's a lot. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah. Now let's talk about the what we use to train our
yeah,
AI systems, and I want to talk a bit about because this is something that I care about. Coming from the social sciences, I care a lot about bias.
yeah.
And for those who aren't familiar, this is what occurs when the data we use to train our AI is not representative of the real world. To give you an example, a prime example of this was in 2016. Microsoft released a chatbot called Tay on Twitter, and then within 24 hours, it had been corrupted by trolls and was tweeting offensive images and
Yeah.
offensive text. So,
That was the
how,
Nazi one, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How do we prevent that? How do we reduce that from reduce that from happening?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a big field of people that work on this kind of stuff. Mostly they call themselves people that work on AI alignment. And one broad thing that doesn't necessarily fix the problem, but helps us know like when there is a problem is just having benchmark data sets that people can use where they say like, for instance, like I'm making this up. I don't know if this exists, but like here's a bunch of job resumes, and the resumes have different names of that represent, different ethnic groups, different genders, stuff like that. And let's make sure when we pass these through our AI model that we're not, the model's not discriminating against, people uh, from less advantaged groups or certain yeah, certain groups that might also be disadvantaged in society. So that's one bucket of things. Like you can make kind of benchmark data sets that at least first let you know, like, okay, is there a problem with the AI model we have? Is it going to be doing things that are biased? The other thing that you can do is what they'll do is they train these models on like huge amounts of data, like trillions of things. Like they'll scrape the internet, and so it's impossible to sift through all of those things and say, okay, we want to clean out everything that might be biased. But then they'll train the model, and then after it's trained, they will try to do extra training essentially that it will eliminate specific cases that they think could be particularly bad. So like with this Chat GPT model that launched recently, it's a specific version of a different model, GPT-3, that they've done extra what's called reinforcement learning on, where they basically try to understand like what are all the edge cases we don't want it to go down. So things like being biased, or there's an example where like people try to get it to tell you how to hotwire a car, it won't do that, and they try to train it so that it avoids those cases. So there's a lot of people working on this stuff. It's I think it's a huge risk area and problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. Is there anything like you would like to see happen in the future with the people who are in AI alignment? Is there anything you'd like to see them do? And is that something you want to be involved in?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've been thinking about a bit recently, because and maybe we're going to talk about this later, but with the with these text to image generation models, the things like DALL-E or Stable Diffusion that can make art for you, I know there's been a lot of concern from um, artists or other kind of creative types that I mean, one that like this might just replace, what they do, but then also, and I think more kind of specifically like that people can just copy their style that and use it to make art in their style without doing any attribution or like without them getting compensated or anything. And so the way these models work is like you can they're trained on a lot of stuff, so like they might be trained on an artist's artwork if it's in certain places online, and so kind of no matter what, as it stands now, their artwork might influence the model. But beyond that, like when someone actually tries to make an image with the model, they'll write out like a dog in the park in a tutu, and then one of the ways you really get the model to make it in the style you want is by saying like in the style of Picasso or in the style of something. And if you go on some of these sites where people show a lot of examples of artwork they've made, um, they'll use often like style of existing artists. So like in the style of Beeple or something. And I think a big thing you could do just in the near term to get better alignment and like better protection of kind of existing artists is do things to kind of constrain in your prompt like how much you're asking it to copy the work of someone who exists today and is an artist. Like maybe it's okay, and I think this is something society needs to align on, but maybe it's okay to try to get it to produce something in the style of a long dead artist whose work is all public domain. But like to get it to try to produce something in the style of an artist that's alive today that's trying to make a living is feels kind of like, I don't know. They should at least consent to that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just one narrow thing, but like I think that's something you could do to better align these AI systems.
Yeah, that's totally fair because I remember my art classes growing up. I was terrible at art. We would be sort of shown different styles of artists who have long gone, like Picasso, and be encouraged to copy that. But never once was I encouraged to try and copy the style of an artist that had happened or was still alive at that
Yeah.
point. So that's kind of really interesting. Now, some of these questions, I'm going to be completely open here. I used the Notion AI, which is
Okay,
integrated
cool.
into Notion itself, to help me generate and come up with some of these questions, which led me to this thought. Could an AI have a podcast?
Yeah. I mean, I think the short answer is yes. Like there's a lot of the main components of a podcast people are kind of doing already with AI. So like I think you can get an AI to learn what your voice sounds like and say things in your voice. Like you can get an AI to write a script for you. I mean, maybe this question maybe was written by an AI, and then you could also get AI to edit and do a lot of the post production stuff. So I think the answer is yes. I'm not sure anyone actually wants to listen to AI podcasts, but at least I'm not sure anyone wants to listen to a podcast that has like no human thought. I feel like people turn to podcasts because of the like something about the kind of human, you know, the humanness of them. Like you're
Yeah,
listening to someone's voice, like there's little jokes, like it's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But
It's those little things, isn't it? Those little kind of almost unconscious things that we do. Those little the sort of canter of our voice, the kind of in jokes that we have, and the way
yeah,
that like even I just stare off into the distance as I think of my next point. It's those little things, isn't it?
yeah, people like stuff like that, I think.
Hey there, got a quick favor to ask of you. This podcast is currently at number 35 in the GOODPODS indie documentary all time chart. And what an amazing place to be. And I've got there because of all of you. Can we break 30? This is my question to you. Can we get higher than 30? If you've not already, click the link that's in the show notes below, whether you're listening to this on Spotify or on YouTube. Go give us a rating and help us get higher. Please, like this will be absolutely amazing. Can we break 30? Please. Okay, maybe I could be accused of begging on that first promo, but just to let you know, I've unified all of the social medias now. It's no longer that absolute mess where I try to say Tom_meets. Everything now, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, you can find me at Tom Meets People. So we mentioned there very briefly AIs and podcasts, and of course AI have now arrived in the podcasting world, thanks to yourself. So introduce Dubb for us. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, I'd love to. So Dubb's a product I'm building for podcasters, and the goal of Dubb is to help podcasters market their podcast more easily and grow their audience. And so the basic way Dubb works is if you're a podcaster, you can upload your podcast to Dubb or link it. And then Dubb has a few AI models that will turn the audio of your podcast into animated clips that you can post on TikTok or Instagram, a blog post that you could put on your newsletter or on Medium or something like that. It'll recommend titles and descriptions for you that you can put on the show notes or on YouTube, and then a few other things as well. Like it'll give you a transcript of the talk. And basically, when I talk to most podcasters, one thing that comes up a lot is that they really love making the podcast. That's the fun part, but um, the stuff that goes into getting your podcast actually an audience is kind of tedious and annoying, like writing all the tweets and doing all the social media stuff. And so Dubb's basically trying to automate that for people as much as possible so that podcasters can focus on like the fun part and not have to spend many hours or hire someone to do all their marketing for them.
Mhm. So why Dubb? Why this AI? This AI? Why podcasters? Instead of something maybe a field that's a little bit more kind of in the mainstream, like we got AI art or the chat generators. Why podcasters?
Yeah. I kind of came to it because I kind of came to it like as a consumer, as someone who listens to podcasts and trying to solve my own problems. So like I like listening to podcasts. I'm always trying to find new podcasts that I might like, but it's pretty hard to find. It's pretty hard to discover new podcasts. Like if you think about it from how it goes as a podcast listener, like maybe you can go on Spotify and see the bazillion podcasts they have there, but and maybe one or two looks interesting, but to really tell if you're going to like it, you have to invest quite a lot of time. Like you're going to have to listen to an hour episode, and you might have to do that a few times so you find one you like. And like most people, just it's kind of challenging to do that, or you just don't have that much time. And so I was thinking, like, okay, what would I actually prefer? Like the thing I would like that would fit my style is if for every podcast I could just read like the episode in kind of an article form, like what you might read on a Substack or a newsletter or something. And I could be like, okay, does this sound interesting? Like, do I like what they're talking about, or is it funny or something? Um, Other people like they want to listen to little snippets of podcasts on TikTok or read the transcript or the description. And so the more I thought about it, the more I was like, well, like AI's kind of gotten good enough recently that you could take a podcast and turn it into all these other forms of media for every podcast, and it's not being done now. And so, it would be fun, and I think a useful thing for me and for podcasters to like build something that does this. So that's what I'm trying to do. I think I'm still working on, how do I make it as useful as possible for podcasters, because they're the customers and the audience that I'm aiming it towards.
Yeah. I'll come back to so because it is. Am I right in thinking you've only been having this for about 2-3 months? This has been a thing.
For longer, like probably about a year, but for the past few months, the idea is like consolidated and like I'm really like working on it, with all my energy.
Yeah, because yeah, for me, it's like I was literally just on Reddit one day and I found you, and I found Dubb, and I was like, okay, I'll give this a go. And then sort of like I think we started having a conversation in the comments, and then that led to that led to this episode. So you don't need to sort of persuade me, but let's talk about everyone else who sort of is a little bit distrustful at the moment. Why should they trust an AI to help them produce content for their show?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think the most important part, as I see it, is that it's the output is not about the output that Dub gives you is not about the AI. It's still centered in like what happened on the podcast and what's in the audio. So all aspects of Dub's output just point back to and use as kind of source material, like what actually was said in the transcript and in the podcast itself. And so Dub's an AI product, like it uses AI, but it's really not about it's not about the AI. Like it's about the podcasters and the podcast itself. And so the output you get, like I would say the most important part is that it's about your podcast and it's not like trying to show off what the AI can do.
And with sort of like Mid Journey and Dall-e as well, it is very sort of impressive what it can do. And I'm still trying to find what are the everyday uses. So obviously we've established sort of podcast marketing, but what other uses do we have for AI in our everyday life? And you can bring it back to Dub if you like.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, people are trying, well, even before this big wave of like GPT-3 and stuff, there was already lots of AI used in all sorts of stuff, like in the finance industry, in uh, in social media. Like every time you open up Instagram or Facebook or whatever, you know, the stuff you see is ordered by AI. So it's already used kind of all over the place. I think for these more recent models, like you know, Dolly or GPT-3, people are like you said, like people are really trying to figure out like, okay, how do you turn this like big kind of? It's clearly like impressive, but how do you turn that into something that actually could be a product that's useful to people? So people are trying a bunch of stuff. Like people are trying to automate some aspects of the legal profession. The law requires a lot of like writing and reading, and also you know synthesizing long documents into some useful thing. And this might be something that GPT-3 is good at. Um, People are trying to automate like how quickly you can make uh, ad copy and ad visuals and stuff. So like maybe you have some product you want to sell, you're a small time business, like you sell, you know, mugs or something for your tea, and uh, maybe you can't afford an ad agency, but like you can afford, you know, some AI software that will show your mug in like, you know, beautiful on the beach in Tahiti and like, you know, in the White House and wherever else. And so people are trying stuff like that. I think it's kind of TBD, like how well what things will work and what things won't, because it's so new.
Like I think you mentioned sort of some everyday cases there. Like I'm totally cool with it being used for copywriting or for generating kind of marketing sort of material with the human eye. But there was one use there that kind of brought a little bit of concern, and it's going to lead to this next question: should we automate anything in the legal profession?
Yeah, no, I mean, uh, it's clearly like the law is something that's so bound up with ethics and fairness that I think anything you do to change the law, like, is quite consequential and requires a lot of, you know, a lot of thought. And clearly like having AI involved is something that would be very consequential and like should be thought about. So I don't actually know. I mean, I know it's something people are trying. What I will say is like I know lots of parts of interacting with the law today, at least I don't know about Britain, but in the US, like are kind of, you know, unfair as it is. Like if you know, the wealthier you are, the more resources you can afford, better lawyers, like the less well off you are, you're just going to have a much tougher time navigating the legal system. So I really think it depends. Like for me, at least, like I feel like whether or not it's appropriate to have AI helping people do things in the law really depends on like, well, is it helping people that weren't going to have access to a lawyer or enough lawyer time as it is? Like, is it giving them, they're starting at zero now, at least they have something, or is it just like another kind of cudgel to like beat down on people who, already like had a bad time with the legal system and now are just going to have a worse time, but it'll be automated. So, I mean, I think in short, like, I feel like it really depends how it's used. But I think it's a good point. Like, we shouldn't just like throw AI into something like the law willy nilly. Like, you really have to think about it.
And you know what? I think that's sort of a recurring theme that I'm seeing in all of the discussions about AI. It sort of depends on how it's used. And we can see it both being used for, and if you'll forgive how blunt these are, both being used for good and for evil. And it's totally fair to say, oh, could we use it in such a way that we could help someone access resources that they wouldn't normally have? I do want to kind of avoid a little bit of speculation, but forgive me for this one question. What do you think the future of AI looks like?
Uh, I mean, I think at least in the next couple years, I think it's basically just going to be like the things we have now, but much, much better. So like we have Chat GPT or GPT-3, and they can write things that they can almost always write something that sounds coherent, but sometimes they say things that, though they sound coherent, like don't actually make sense if you think about them. I think uh, things like that, cases like that, are probably going to become less and less frequent, and like we're going to get output from these models that just like you know works a lot better and is more and more convincingly human. There's a ton of investment going on right now, and the people that work on these models like or have the next generation of them already in development, and so I think what we see out of those will be like incredibly impressive. As far as so I think that's like the next wave. Um, as far as how far they can push this current type of AI model, like transformers and diffusion models that are being used to make GPT-3 and DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, that kind of remains to be seen. For now, basically they're still just showing that like the more training data and the more compute time you throw at these models, the better the model gets without even having to do anything like extra without even having to like come up with a new type of model. And so they're going to keep doing that, I think, until that stops working. Like just make bigger and bigger and bigger models, more and more and more data. uh, Beyond that, I don't know, but I think even in the next couple of years we'll see like whatever we think is impressive now will be, you know kind of the standards will be totally set again.
So I have something of a tradition here at Tom Meets Interesting People. These questions are going to close us out, and they come from the Prost questionnaire, which were then adapted by Bernard Pivot, and then later by James Lipton. And now I present my AI adaptation to yourself. 10 questions. You ready?
Yep, let's do it.
What is your favorite word?
Sorted.
Sorted or sordid?
Oh, I don't know. I was reaching around for, I'm horrible at favorites, to be honest, but I was kind of reaching around. There's a set of words I like to use if I'm like really feel like I'm like, trying to make a point or something. And I just like the way that one sounds. It feels like it has like meat behind it. Obviously.
The use cases of that. I'm just cringing hearing a sentence start with obviously. We're in agreement there. What engages you?
I think conversation. I love talking to people. I feel most like present when I talk to someone. Hearing someone just speak for an hour straight, like in a lecture or something. I almost always I can never actually follow that. I almost always like not lose interest, but lose attention in like 5 minutes.
I had to also avoid making a joke there about podcasters who also talk for an hour straight. Hello, how are you? What sound or noise do you love? What sound or noise do you hate?
I'm like super kind of get cringed out by the sound of people chewing loudly. Yeah, kind of freaks me out.
Everyone's favorite question. What is your favorite curse word?
I guess bastard feels kind of old timey. Feels they use it in Game of Thrones.
It's his favorite word too, I think. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I think I would like being a historian who just sits around in a room with kind of like big bookcases, and maybe I could pretend like I smoke a pipe and wear a tweed jacket. I think I would like that.
What profession would you not like to do?
I think I would be a terrible electrician. I think like I just wouldn't have the patience for actually I don't think I would like triple check things enough, and I would end up burning someone's house down. I would not like that.
If you could say only one statement to any one person, what would that statement be and who would that person be?
I guess I'm listening to this podcast right now, Behind the Bastards, great word. And they're talking about Christopher Columbus and just kind of all the, all that he wrought personally on the New World, and like, just terrible things he did, and his legacy. And I guess I would go back to him and I would say, when he's leaving Spain, I'd be like, you're going the wrong way. Turn around and go the other way. I'd try to prevent him making that voyage.
The mention Behind the Bastards as well. I checked out, great podcast. Sam, where could people find you online, and where could we find Dubb?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Samuel MG Plank. Plank is PLANK. And then you can find Dubb at www.dubb.media. And please go check it out if you're a podcaster. It's free to try, and I'd love to hear what you think.